Rotten Tomatoes shows that plenty of Ryan Reynolds movies have been rejected by audiences over the years. But are they really as bad as everyone says? We revisited the worst that the wisecracking actor has to offer, and we found a few surprises. National Lampoon's Van Wilder has a score of 18% on Rotten Tomatoes, and quite frankly, that's very generous. This is a crude sex comedy that simply doesn't have much going for it. Reynolds plays the title character, a college student in his 7th year who just can't leave his university. Alongside Van Wilder's hijinks are a character from India named Taj Mahal, a well-endowed bulldog, and a scene involving Van Wilder's rival that has to be one of the grossest things ever put to film. The whole thing is offensive and disgusting in equal measure. This was Reynolds' first major role after coming off the show Two Guys, a Girl, and a Pizza Place, and he does a fine job. It's everything else that's awful. As David Nusset, a Real Film, wrote in a scathing review, the film belongs to that dying comedy subgenre, the gross-out flick, and this one takes things particularly far. That'd be all fine if any of this stuff was in the least bit funny. While Reynolds does his best to make the film enjoyable, it's hard to find his character likable. Even those who enjoy a bit of toilet humor will probably roll their eyes at this one. Blade Trinity, the aptly named third entry in the Blade movie series, has all the great fight scenes of the first two films. At the same time, though, it suffers from a distinct shortage of Wesley Snipes. You know, the guy who plays Blade? Apparently, Snipes and director David S. Goyer had a falling out, and this led to an awkward shoot. According to Patton Oswalt, Snipes filmed Blade Trinity in a bizarre way, only coming out of his trailer for close-ups. Snipes has denied that this was the case, pointing out that he helped get Goyer hired in the first place. Whatever the reason for the lack of Blade might be, the winner in this situation was Ryan Reynolds, who is said to have been given more lines as a result. His character, the vampire hunter Hannibal King, is one of the best parts of this otherwise forgettable threequel.
Just a thought, but you might want to consider blinking once in a while.
Despite Reynolds' best efforts, the film didn't do well with critics. It holds a 24% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, though viewers were kinda with an audience score of 58%. We're siding with the majority of regular moviegoers on this one. The 2005 remake of 1979's The Amityville Horror is a sleeker entry than the original film. And despite only getting a 24% score on Rotten Tomatoes, it's definitely one of the best of the many Amityville movies that have been made over the years. The Amityville Horror stars Ryan Reynolds in a performance unlike any seen from him before or since. As the father of the Lutz family, he's one of the most impacted by the dark influence of the house, selling the terror with no hint of his typical wisecracking persona on show. In fact, seeing a famously friendly face do such terrible things makes it even more effective. Just be warned, if you really love dogs, you might want to give this one a pass. Reviewing the movie for the website Daily Dead, horror movie critic Heather Wixon wrote, "Not only does the remake give us deeper characters to invest in, better scares, and made the act of chopping wood absolutely one of the most horrifying things ever, but it also does what all good cinematic retellings should do, respect its roots, but also steps out and does something different." Waiting stars Ryan Reynolds and Justin Long as a pair of waiters working at a chain restaurant called Shenanigans. It's an apt name given the behavior of the staff at this particular branch, but the mischief they get up to is neither clever nor funny. Monty, Dean, and the other male staff have a running joke that involves them constantly flashing their privates to each other, a gag that wasn't particularly creative in 2005 and is downright horrifying now. This kind of humor was widespread in Hollywood comedies in the mid-noughts, but even at the time, critics still found it tiresome. As Roger Ebert put it in his 1.5-star review, "To me, it seems more like a catalyst for desperate shock value from a filmmaker who's trying to pump energy into a dead scenario." Debut writer-director Rob McKittrick set out to make a slacker comedy in the same vein as Kevin Smith's Clerks, which is a far better option if that's the kind of vibe you're after. While it has a cult following among people who work in the service industry, the majority of viewers will hate this unfunny and offensive flick.
Don't with people that handle your food.
Chaos Theory stars Reynolds as author and so-called efficiency expert Frank Allen. He lives by a time-tested routine, but that all changes when his wife Susan moves his watch by 10 minutes as a joke. The consequences of that joke end up being huge. Frank's meticulous schedule falls apart and his life spirals out of control 1 inch at a time. It's not the best Ryan Reynolds film you'll ever see, but despite its 30% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, Chaos Theory is actually pretty funny and holds up surprisingly well. Perhaps this romantic dramedy is more enjoyable these days because mid-budget movies about adults living regular lives are a dying breed. That's a real shame, so if If you miss that sort of thing, you should definitely give Chaos Theory a chance. As Ruth Stein wrote in a review for the San Francisco Chronicle, by creating likable characters and putting them in situations that seem plausible, if a bit of a stretch, the film succeeds. Fireflies in the Garden boasts an impressive cast, but even with all the talent involved, it's still a complete snooze fest. Reynolds plays another bearded and bespectacled author here. This time around, he's a romance novelist, one who has a complicated relationship with his English professor father. Old wounds are reopened after a sudden death in the family. But as tragic as this particular moment is, it's hard to care about the Taylors and their drama, because none of them are the least bit interesting. What attracted the likes of Willem Dafoe, Julia Roberts, Carrie Ann Moss, and Emily Watson to this project is a mystery that critics puzzled over. J.R. Jones of the Chicago Reader wrote, "This histrionic family drama must have looked good on paper to attract such a big-name cast, but on the screen it comes off as glib, rushed, and underdeveloped." Jones was just one of many reviewers to trash the film, which has a measly 21% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Fireflies in the Garden actually premiered at Sundance nearly 4 years before it hit theaters in 2011, so producers clearly knew it wasn't a winner. The New York Post called its eventual release, quote, "a token theatrical burial." When it premiered in 2011, the DC film Green Lantern bombed at the box office and was hammered by critics, earning a 25% score on Rotten Tomatoes. Starring Ryan Reynolds as Hal Jordan, this big-screen adaptation sees him given the powers of the Green Lantern and taken to an alien planet. Like many of Reynolds' less successful projects, it looked great on paper, but Green Lantern ended up flopping so hard that it almost derailed Reynolds' career. As Reynolds told Taraji P. Henson as part of Variety's Actors on Actors series, "I represented the death of the superhero for a while. After Green Lantern, I was pretty much unhireable." But what makes Green Lantern so terrible exactly? Fans of the comics could still fill several pages answering that question. But perhaps the main reason that the film failed so spectacularly is because it simply looks terrible. For some reason, the powers that be decided to render Reynolds' superhero suit was CGI, rather than just making a physical costume, and the result was completely cartoonish. Reynolds agrees with that assessment, and even made several jokes in the Deadpool movies mocking himself for the film's failure.
And please don't make the super suit green. Or animated.
The only reason to stick this one on is for a look at Reynolds and Blake Lively before they tied the knot. They met during production in 2010 and were married 2 years later.
What is this? Why is your skin green? Why are you glowing? What the hell is with that mask?
Came with the outfit.
The change-up is like Freaky Friday in that it's about two people who swap bodies, but that's where the similarities start and end. Freaky Friday is funny and charming, while the change-up is anything but. It follows two guys who magically end up in each other's skin after peeing in a fountain while wishing that they had the other's lives. With a setup like that, is it any wonder the movie scored just 26% on Rotten Tomatoes? This flat comedy flick comes from the director of Wedding Crashers and the writers of The Hangover, both of which did considerably better with the critics. The change-up is meant to be similarly endearing in a frank sort of way, with both men learning what they appreciate about their lives. That's all well and good, but the lack of laughs leading up to this moment means that it simply fails as a comedy. Critic Will Leach didn't mince words with his review for Yahoo Entertainment, stating, "The change-up is cynical, tone-deaf junk that has nothing to contribute to the world but smirks and a general dismissive attitude toward human connection and interaction." The worst movie on the list in terms of Rotten Tomatoes scores, with a rating of just 12%, is 2013's R.I.P.D. This supernatural Ryan Reynolds flop found a second life on Netflix at one stage, but it seems like that was more out of morbid curiosity than anything else. On top of a ridiculous name that stands for Rest in Peace Department, the film has little going for it in terms of plot. Reynolds plays a Boston cop who gets killed by his partner and is subsequently recruited into the R.I.P.D., which hunts for souls that have escaped judgment. His new partner, played by Jeff Bridges, is a Wild West lawman with old-school sensibilities. It isn't particularly funny or clever, and the real mystery here is why Jeff Bridges is slumming it in such a silly movie. London's Evening Standard put it harshly but fairly when they published in their review, "Who wouldn't be dispirited by this script, which, when not plagiarizing Men in Black, plays out like an episode of Doctor Who aimed at dumb, fascistic teens?" Although Bridges and Reynolds make a good team, the material and visuals let them down big time. It's no wonder R.I.P.D. bombed hard at the box office, losing somewhere around $140 million.
This is a joke.
Hilarious.
Selfless is another body swap movie starring Ryan Reynolds, but it's thankfully not another Freaky Friday clone. In this one, Ben Kingsley's Damien Hale jumps into a younger body, played by Reynolds, which he's been assured was grown in a lab. Of course, this isn't true, and soon the younger Damien starts having flashbacks to the personal and military life of his body's original owner. One of the biggest issues here is that the whole body swap thing isn't actually pulled off very well, with Reynolds making little effort to match Kingsley's accent and mannerisms. Selfless is meant to make viewers question the morality of changing your body, but the plot is so vapid and shallow that it's hard to get past the surface. Kathy Mayo of Fantasy and Science Fiction magazine wrote in her review, "I do wonder what the filmmakers might have done if they had avoided the trite, explosive tropes of an action film for something that actually touched upon the many issues raised by their basic body swap plot." In the end, Selfless reveals itself to be a dumb movie masquerading as a clever one. Most critics agreed, with only 18% of them giving positive reviews. Technically, the main character of 2016's Criminal is CIA agent Bill Pope, played by Ryan Reynolds. However, Pope's memories are implanted into a convict named Jericho Stewart, played by Kevin Costner, after his death. Pope was killed on the job before he could reveal to his superiors where he hid an important informant, and now it's up to Jericho to fill in the gaps. Tommy Lee Jones and Gary Oldman also star, which makes the fact that Criminal stinks even more, well, criminal. With so much talent, how did this picture end up with a score of 30% on Rotten Tomatoes? For one thing, Criminal never really explains what's actually going on. It's not clear what plot Pope was trying to foil, or why Jericho is suddenly a nice guy. The goals of the big bad are murky at best, and the film can't decide how serious it is. In her 2-star review, Sarah Michelle Fetters of Movie Freak wrote, "Douglas Cook and David Weisberg's science fiction-flavored scenario attempts to have it multiple ways. On one hand, playing events with deathly, bleakly murderous seriousness, while at others crafting a comic book-flavored absurdist vibe where anything and everything is suddenly possible." Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard is a follow-up to the Hitman's Bodyguard, which paired up Ryan Reynolds with Samuel L. Jackson. Like the first film, the sequel didn't score well with critics on Rotten Tomatoes, but it also did better with regular moviegoers, notching an audience score of 79%. Even though the plot of the follow-up film has some holes, having the two A-listers team up with Salma Hayek makes for some fun moments and solid gags.
He is the most annoying mother on planet Earth.
Excuse me! I have 20/20 hearing.
Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard isn't an Oscar-worthy movie by any stretch, but it's certainly an entertaining one. It's packed full of exciting action sequences and makes for a fun 100 minutes if you're willing to suspend your disbelief. While the majority of critics were unable to do that, the film scored a disappointing 26% on Rotten Tomatoes. Jeanette Katsoulis of the New York Times had a good time watching it anyway. She wrote, "Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard is loud, lazy, profane, and well-nigh incoherent. It's also at times quite funny, with a goofy vulgarity that made me giggle.